כששואלים אותו איך הוא יכול להפסיק את כל עבודתו כסנטור כדי לשמור שבת מדי שבוע, הוא עונה, איך הייתי יכול לעשות את כל עבודתי אלמלא הייתי מפסיק כדי לשמור שבת מדי שבוע. הסנטור ג'ו ליברמן, מי שהיה מועמד המפלגה הדמוקרטית לתפקיד סגן נשיא ארצות הברית, מתאר בספרו זמן שבת את כוחו של יום המנוחה להגברת השוויון בין בני האדם, וכיצד דרגות ומעמד חברתי נמוגים עם כניסת היום השביעי. התמזל מזלה של העמותה לתרגם את הספר הנפלא הזה ביחד עם הוצאת קורן. אנחנו נרגשים מאוד, סנטור ליברמן, שנפלה בחלקנו הזכות העצומה לחבור ליהודי כמוך, שמשלב באישיותו נועם, אהבה ונאמנות ליהדות, ביחד עם פתיחות וכבוד לכל אורח חיים. מעל במה זו, אנו מודים לך ולהדסה על התגייסותכם לטובת העמותה ולטובת קידום השבת. הסנטור ליברמן מכהן כיושב ראש ועדת הידידים של העמותה, וזו זכות גדולה שאתה מכבד אותנו כאן בנוכחותך. אנחנו שמחים להזמין אותך לספר על השבת כהזדמנות לאחדות ותיקון בעם היהודי. בבקשה, the floor is yours, סנטור ליברמן. הסנטור ינאם באנגלית, ועד שיגיע לבמה אני מבקשת ממי שזקוק לתרגום לעברית, להרים את ידו והסדרנים יגיעו עם אוזניות עבורו.
Good morning, Boker Tov, and thank you for that great introduction. I must say, having spent the week with Ruth and Ronnie talking about the age group, every time we get together I feel younger, so I'm going to stay. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm very excited about what you're doing. I want to particularly thank Ruth Kabese Abramson for her visionary creation and leadership of Shabbat Unplugged, and also to thank her and Ronnie and all involved for deciding to publish my book on Shabbat in Hebrew to advance your organization's work. And if that were not enough, to try to help you implement your plan to make Shabbat a source of greater unity, not division among the people of Israel. That, I must say, is well beyond what even I ever imagined for my little book on Shabbat. I'm honored and I'm grateful, and I thank you very, very much. So in my remarks this morning, I want to tell you first how a former United States Senator came to write a book about Shabbat, and then I want to explain why I believe very strongly in the big new initiative of Shabbat Unplugged, which is the focus of this conference, which is to see Shabbat as an opportunity to more fully unite the people of Israel, and then really the Jewish people of the world. In the Talmud, Beitza 16a, it is written, said the Holy One, blessed be he, to Moses, Moses, in my storehouse, says Hashem, I have a goodly gift, and Shabbat is its name. During my life, I will admit that there have been times when Shabbat seemed more like a burden than a goodly gift, separating me from the society around me with all the opportunities it offered on Friday night and Saturday. There was even a time, which I describe in my book, during college and law school, where I stopped observing Shabbat altogether. But then I came back to it, and I described that too in the book, and it really has become the wonderful gift that God intended it to be, anchoring my life, strengthening my family, and enabling, guiding, and energizing the work that I aspire to do on the other 6 days of the week. When I was elected to the United States Senate in 1988 and then nominated for vice president 12 years later of the United States in 2000, my Shabbat observance became very public. And because, as it happened, I was the first elected official in the Senate and certainly to run for national office who observed Shabbat, it was a topic of great media interest and public interest as well. People were very respectful of my observance, but as was said in the introduction, many would say to me, including many Jews, how can you observe Shabbat and be a United States Senator? And my answer was exactly what was said, probably subconsciously channeling and paraphrasing Achad Ha'am. I would say, I don't know how I could be a United States Senator and not observe Shabbat. By that I meant, of course, that I did not know how I could work as hard or as focused as I needed to 6 days a week if I could not rest and refresh by fash spiritually, physically, and intellectually on the seventh day. Sometimes I even wondered whether my Shabbat observance elected me to the United States Senate. And so I shared this story with you. In 1988, I ran for the United States Senate. I ran against an incumbent senator. He'd been there 18 years. He was very strong, very popular. Very few people thought I had a chance to defeat him. Even I wondered about it, but I thought it was worth making the try. About a week before the election, I received a call from a very good friend of mine who was a state senator in Hartford. His name was Cornelius O'Leary. When I tell this story at home, I always say Cornelius O'Leary was neither Ashkenazic or Mizrahi. He was a good Irish Catholic Democrat. And he said, I'm calling to tell you I think you're going to win the election. So I said, that's great to hear, Khan was what we called him. Why do you think so? Because I think you and I are in a minority of people who think I can win the election. So he said, I'll tell you a story. I went to bring something to my mother yesterday afternoon, and she was there with 3 of her friends. They're all Roman Catholic women, older women. So that was the year that running for president was George Bush Sr. On the Republican ticket and Michael Dukakis on the Democratic ticket. So I asked them, who are you going to vote for president? And they all said Bush. I argued with them. I couldn't convince them. So I gave up and I said, okay, what about the U.S. Senate race between Weicker and Lieberman? And he says, my mother said to me, oh, we've talked about that. We're all voting for Lieberman. So he said, I asked him, why is that so easy? And my mother said, we all respect the fact that he doesn't do politics on his Sabbath. So that's why it's just possible that being Shomer Shabbat elected me to the United States Senate. And the bottom line on that political analysis is Baruch Hashem. Who knew? Over the years, people ask me questions about Shabbat. What can you do and what can't you do on your Sabbath and why? And it was really to answer those questions, but also to explain why I love Shabbat so much, why it has become so important to me and my family, an island, if you will, of tranquility and beauty in the midst of a big and often turbulent ocean, that I wrote the book called The Gift of Rest, which was published in the United States in 2013. And I will admit to you that I also, though not a rabbi, believed I had some goals that might be called kiruv, which is that I hoped that the book would encourage others to observe Shabbat in whatever way they choose. the responses to the book were very gratifying from Jews and non-Jews. And as I said last night in a brief conversation, I've been blessed to have opportunities to be involved in some very significant legislation, for instance, in America. But I really feel that the publication of the capacity I had to write this book and the publication of it is one of the most important things I've done in my life, and all the more so now that thanks to Shabbat Unplugged, it's being published in Hebrew in Israel. I think much of the success of the book related to the lives that we're all leading today in the digital age. Some years ago, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with a man named Regis McKenna, who is one of the big thinkers. He's actually a marketer in Silicon Valley. And he covered a lot of history in a very few words. He said to me, in the agricultural age, people lived where they worked. They worked the farm, they lived on the farm. In the industrial age, people left their homes to go to work in a factory or an office. In the digital age, we never leave work, because wherever we are, our digital equipment is with us. And the truth is that people find it hard naturally to separate the different parts of their lives. They need an external norm to convince them to do what really I think they want to do and know they should do, but seem unable to do on their own. And that's where Shabbat offers a solution. The hardest moment, I will tell you, as I describe in my book, for me on Erev Shabbat is when I have to turn off my smartphone. But it is also the best and most transformational moment. Some of the most gratifying responses I received to the book, The Gift of Rest, in the U.S. were from people who are not Jewish. And one I want to tell you briefly was from a man named Cecil Samuelson, who at the time was the president of Brigham Young University, a great university in Utah, as you probably know, under the sponsorship of the Mormon Church. So he had read the book, and he invited me out to speak at the university, and he said to me that the book had had an effect on him, that when he read it, he realized that he was allowing his smartphone to interrupt and interfere and diminish his observing and enjoyment of his Sabbath on Sunday. So he said, I decided I'm turning off my smartphone. President of the university. So he said, frankly, for the first 2 Sundays, there was panic on the campus. Where's the president? Is something wrong with him? Is he healthy? Was he kidnapped? Anyway, he said they got it after a couple of weeks. They knew I would return their emails and their phone calls on Monday morning. I didn't want to tell him that if he wanted to follow the Jewish model, he could start doing it at sundown on Sunday. That was a little too much, really, I thought. But anyway, it was a beautiful story, and he said it enabled him to observe his Shabbat, but also to appreciate the rest that he received. He later wrote in a blurb to a later edition of my books that I appreciated very much. He said, there is much in this book that we Christians can admire, and that will remind us of what we have lost as respect for the Sabbath has diminished. End of quote. So I'm quite personal in this book because Shabbat is very personal for me. For example, I describe the time in my life when I stopped observing Shabbat and why I think I stopped, and then why I came back to full observance and why, and how meaningful it has been to me. I also discuss some of the difficult decisions that I've had to make, which in their way were unprecedented, at least in American government, in trying to combine my public life with my observance of Shabbat. I made decisions that not everyone will agree with, but that's the nature of our people, of our history, and of exactly what we're talking about in this conference, which is there's not just one way, in my opinion, to observe Shabbat. I even write about the halachic encouragement of, shall I say, romantic engagement between spouses on Shabbat. This part, of course, was written with the prior approval of my Eshet Chayil. But sometimes some of the minhagim that we have developed as Jews in observing Shabbat, I'm not sure what I'm doing there unless it's telling me to stop, but I have not. For 24 years of my life in the U.S. Senate, I had the power to filibuster, to speak without limit. So this is a very brief speech. So I tell you a little story that I love about some of the bonuses that come with Shabbat observance. Early in my Senate career, I had been at the Capitol. There's a subway that takes us from the Capitol to our office buildings, little subway. So I went down, and the media hang out there. So on this day, a young woman came over to me. It was February, and she said, Valentine's Day, which is a day of romance, so to speak, in celebrating romance in America. So she said, I'm asking all the senators, do you ever give your wife flowers, and how often? So I said, well, I do. Well, how often do you give your wife flowers? So I said, I give my wife flowers every Friday afternoon. You know this minhag. So the article came out in the paper, and it declared me to be the most romantic member of the United States Senate. Again, Baruch Hashem. I did not write this book as a rabbi or as a learned Jewish studies scholar, because I'm self-evidently neither. Now that gives me less authority, but also more latitude, and hopefully makes the book more accessible to more people who are also not rabbis or scholars. Throughout the pages, I aim to do what this conference aims to do and what Shabbat Unplugged aims to do, which is open wide the doors to Shabbat observance and invite in really anyone who wants to enter, however they want to enter and however far they want to come in. The expanded reasons that Shabbat Unplugged has given for publishing my book now in Hebrew have taken me, frankly, to a new level of thinking about Shabbat. And it's a very Israeli level of thinking because this is the Jewish nation. In other words, to see Shabbat not just as an opportunity for individuals and families to stop, rest, refresh themselves, but as a larger opportunity for Shabbat to be a symbol, but also really a source of greater national unity among Israelis and hopefully of other Jews in the world. I'm convinced that Shabbat Unplugged is on to something big here, and it's transformative, and more important, in my opinion, as we heard last night, so too does the Minister of Religious Affairs, Matan Kahana, who warmly and quite tangibly endorsed Shabbat Unplugged's new initiative at the opening dinner last night. Okay, now that could be, it could be taking my pulse, I don't know, but all right. Yeah, but still good, I'm encouraged. Let me say just a little bit more about the bases in history and theology of what we're doing here today. The idea that a religious observance like Shabbat can help to overcome division among the Jewish people actually has precedent, support in Jewish theology and history. After all, Shabbat began in the fourth of the Ten Commandments, which God gave on Mount Sinai, in what was, the rabbis tell us, the greatest moment of unity in Jewish history. Not only was all of Bnei Israel, all the children of Israel, there to accept and embrace the commandments, including Shabbat, Naseh v'Nishma, but the rabbis teach us that every Jew who has lived since was also there in some mysterious and spiritual but real way. Shabbat Unplugged now aspires to achieve something like that, the same national unity in Israel and throughout the world by building what I would call Shabbat bridges between people who are otherwise separated. The Torah also gives us a theological reason to be unified. This is back to basics, but sometimes we forget the basics. We Jews, after all, are the original monotheists. We believe in one God, and we believe that that God created the earth and all of us. We're not here by accident. And that means that we are all children of the same God. We have to get back in touch with that simple but profound reality, truth, in my opinion. We are brothers and sisters, each created in the extraordinarily diverse image of God, and each, therefore, deserving the freedom to choose, including the freedom to choose how to observe and celebrate Shabbat. There's also very strong historic precedent in Jewish history for Jewish practices like Shabbat to serve great national purposes. Ruth mentioned this briefly. After the destruction of the Second Temple from exile in Babylon, Ezra and Nehemiah decided that Jewish religious identity was at the heart of the Jewish nation's chance to survive in exile. And so they required, as you know, public reading of the Torah and began the process of rabbinically ordained halakha laws, including the rules of Shabbat, that preserved the Jewish nation until the modern Zionist movement began in the 19th century and Jewish national sovereignty was reestablished in this Holy Land in 1948. The religious institutions and observance, most people agree that most enabled the Israel sovereign nation to survive in exile were Shabbat and the synagogue, the shul, the Beit Knesset. So now in this program, we are asking Shabbat to enable the people of Israel and the Jewish people to unify. When you think about it, the work that Shabbat did to sustain the Jewish people during all those years of exile was enormous, and in some sense it's relatively not easy, but manageable to ask Shabbat to help us unify more now. Remember Rav Kook's legendary Sudot Shlishit, first in London and then in Jerusalem, which were open to all who wanted to be there, regardless of whether they were Haredi or Chiloni, whether they were philosophers or laborers. And of course, Israel is the perfect place for this new Shabbat movement for unity to begin, because this is the Jewish nation. I mean, after all, on Friday afternoon, and a Jew coming from America is struck by this, everyone here seems to say Shabbat Shalom to everyone else, regardless of their level of Shabbat observance. More than half the Jewish people, on polls that I've seen, say that they already observe Shabbat in some way. That is a strong and unique place from which to begin the movement to make Shabbat a more unifying force. So, first Israel, then the Jewish community in America, and then the rest of the world. And you know, if you'll allow me to take flight here, Shabbat could also be a source of greater unity between Jews and the more than 3 billion monotheistic Christians and Muslims in the world who have adopted the Jewish idea and ethic of Shabbat. Some of that vision and hope actually is now realistically embraced in the recently adopted Abrahamic Accords. So as President Kennedy often said, and he was the inspirational hero of my generation in American politics, and appropriately for our age, he was quoting a Chinese proverb, a journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. Today we're beginning such a journey with a single step. Wonderful panels, experienced, creative, smart people who will discuss the various ways to implement the goals that Shabbat Unplugged has set. There'll be disagreement, but that's the way we grow. That's the way we reach truth and hopefully unity. I know that some people here at the conference and others outside will say that the goals that Shabbat Unplugged has are the stuff of naive dreams. But as Herzl said and proved, and you know very well, if we will it, it is no dream. Others will say Shabbat Unplugged. If Shabbat Unplugged ever achieved the unity it seeks in Israel through Shabbat, it would be a miracle. But of course, there we go to Ben Gurion, who said that in Israel, if you don't believe in miracles, you are not a realist. So as I've met the people in the Shabbat Unplugged movement, and I look around this room today, I think we're full of willful realists. In other words, let's prepare ourselves for a miracle, and then let's agree to work together, yachad, to make that miracle into reality. Thank you very, very much.